In recent months, it appeared that the United States of America was once again softening its position toward Russia. The signals were subtle but noticeable: restrained language, cautious diplomacy, and an apparent willingness to explore compromise. Toward the end of 2025, Washington went further. It proposed a comprehensive 28-point peace plan aimed at ending the war in Ukraine. On paper, the plan was ambitious. In reality, it would have given Vladimir Putin almost everything he had demanded since the first days of the invasion: territorial concessions, long-term security guarantees, and an effective end to Western pressure. For Moscow, it looked like a diplomatic victory without having to win decisively on the battlefield. But the plan never advanced. Ukraine proposed changes, rejecting key provisions that threatened its sovereignty. And Putin, in a pattern that has defined his leadership for decades, did not reject the proposal outright. Instead, he delayed. He postponed. He avoided commitment. Time passed. Deadlines slipped. And peace remained out of reach. That refusal may have been the moment Donald Trump decided that diplomacy alone had reached its limits. Because what followed was not another round of talks, nor another carefully worded statement. It was a strategic shift, calculated, coordinated, and designed to strike Russia where it hurts most. A combination of stalled peace negotiations and America's strategic interests in Venezuela triggered a sharp change in Washington's approach, this time in close cooperation with Great Britain. In this time, the United States did not rely on tanks, missiles, or airstrikes. Instead, it used economic power and maritime enforcement. The United States crushed Russia, without firing a single shot. It all began with a blockade. On December 17, The Telegraph reported that President Trump announced a blockade targeting all sanctioned oil tankers entering or leaving Venezuela. Officially, the measure was presented as pressure against Venezuela's former president, Nicolas Maduro. Maduro had already been removed from power and placed into U.S. custody. The Trump administration accused him of using Venezuela's oil exports to finance drug trafficking networks, terrorism, and organized crime. In a post on Truth Social, Trump declared that the Venezuelan regime had been designated a foreign terrorist organization due to the theft of U.S. assets, as well as its involvement in terrorism, drug trafficking, and human trafficking. Today, Trump wrote, "I order the blocking of all sanctioned oil tankers entering or leaving Venezuela." The announcement came shortly after U.S. forces seized a sanctioned oil tanker traveling from Venezuela to Cuba. Trump's message to Maduro was blunt. His days were numbered. But Maduro was not the primary audience. Someone else understood the message far more clearly. Vladimir Putin. Russia operates a vast, ghost fleet, a shadow network of oil tankers used to quietly transport sanctioned oil between Russia, Iran, and Venezuela. These vessels frequently sail under false flags, switch identities, disable tracking systems, and operate outside normal maritime law. For the Kremlin, this fleet is a financial lifeline. A U.S. blockade around Venezuela was therefore not just a regional move, it was a direct threat to Russia's war economy. That threat became reality almost immediately. American forces located, intercepted, and approached two vessels connected to Russia's shadow fleet. And soon after Trump's announcement, U.S. attention shifted to another ship, one that would become central to the unfolding confrontation. The vessel was formerly known as Bella I. Bella I had already been sanctioned by the United States in 2024. Intelligence sources suspected it of carrying cargo linked to Hezbollah. The ship was sailing illegally under the flag of Guyana, despite not being registered there, and was actively attempting to evade the American blockade. This was not a routine inspection. What followed was a 3-week maritime chase across the Atlantic Ocean. The ship's multinational crew, Russian, Ukrainian, and Indian, ignored repeated U.S. stop orders and fled into open waters. American naval assets pursued. Diplomats exchanged warnings. Russia attempted to intervene politically. And just before the new year, Moscow took a bold step, It officially added Bela I to the Russian National Ship Registry. The vessel raised the Russian flag. The Kremlin believed this changed everything. Under its logic, the ship was now Russian territory. Any further attempt to seize it, Moscow argued, would be an act of aggression. From the Kremlin's perspective, this was sanctuary. The ship turned back before reaching Venezuela. It was not carrying oil. U.S. officials faced a choice: abandon the pursuit, or risk a diplomatic incident. Many assumed Washington would back down, especially given Trump's often discussed relationship with Putin. They were wrong. According to The Telegraph, the United States continued its efforts to intercept and board Bela I. Russia issued formal protests. Kremlin officials demanded the pursuit stop. Washington ignored them. With assistance from British allies, the United States closed in. On January 7, Pravda reported that British Secretary of Defense John Healey confirmed the United Kingdom's military support for the U.S. operation. He offered few details, stating only that British forces demonstrated skill and professionalism while supporting the interception. What we do know is significant. Royal Air Force aircraft participated. Warning shots were fired across the bow of the vessel, which had by then been renamed Marinera. This was escalation, but deliberate escalation. The message was unmistakable. The blockade would remain. Any ship attempting to bypass it would be stopped, regardless of flags, protests, or threats. The seizure of Bela I shattered a key assumption in Moscow, that Putin's relationship with Trump could shield Russia's shadow operations. And it didn't stop there. On the very same day Bela I was detained, U.S. forces seized another Russian oil tanker, the motor tanker Sofia, in the Caribbean Sea. The vessel was sailing without a national flag and lacked valid registration documents. According to U.S. authorities, it was operating under American sanctions. Images released by U.S. Southern Command showed American forces boarding the ship at sea. U.S. Secretary of Homeland Security Kristi Noem announced the seizures publicly. "You can run," she said, "but you can't hide. We will not stop protecting the American people and cutting off the financing of narco-terrorism wherever we find it." Although the statement referenced Venezuela, the true target was clear. Maduro was already in custody. The warning was meant for Putin. The loss of 2 Ghost Fleet tankers was a serious blow. But the pressure was only beginning. On January 8, The Independent and Al Jazeera reported that Trump had thrown his support behind legislation imposing secondary sanctions on countries that continue to buy Russian energy. The bill, co-authored by Senator Lindsey Graham, would allow tariffs of up to 500% on Russian oil buyers. Trump's endorsement did not automatically turn the bill into law. It still had to pass through Congress. But his approval removed the largest political obstacle. According to Senator Graham, the legislation would give Trump enormous leverage over China, India, and Brazil, pressuring them to stop buying Russian oil that directly funds the war in Ukraine. The stakes are enormous. China and India together account for roughly 70% of Russia's energy exports. Even modest tariffs in the past reduced India's imports of Russian oil. A 500% tariff would force both Beijing and New Delhi to make a difficult calculation: is discounted Russian oil worth massive economic retaliation? If the answer is no, Russia's energy revenue would collapse. At the same time, Great Britain opened another front. In November 2025, the UK announced it would ban British companies from providing maritime services, transport, insurance, and maintenance for Russian liquefied natural gas exports. The ban will be phased in throughout 2026. Britain is moving faster than the European Union, which plans to fully ban Russian LNG imports only by 2027. That delay has consequences. Russia earns billions of euros from LNG sales to Europe. Greenpeace estimates that the Yamal LNG project alone generated more than $40 billion between 2022 and 2024. The Kremlin taxed those profits heavily. According to Euromaidan Press, that revenue was enough to finance thousands of long-range drones used against Ukraine. Sanctions are already slowing Russia's ambitions. Reuters reported that Russia has delayed its goal of producing 100 million tons of LNG annually by several years. But analysts argue more can be done. If the European Union followed Britain's led and sanctioned Greek-operated LNG tankers essential to the Yamal project, Russia would struggle to replace them. As pressure mounted, Moscow's rhetoric escalated. On January 7, Russian State Duma defense official Alexei Zhuravlyev issued threats of military retaliation, including nuclear responses, over the seizure of Bela I. He called the action piracy. He claimed it was an attack on Russian territory. Such nuclear threats are familiar. But their impact appears to be diminishing. What is clear is that the actions of the United States and Great Britain have rattled the Kremlin. Putin's image of strength, carefully constructed over decades, is beginning to crack. As the Telegraph observed, for more than 20 years Putin has demanded to be treated as the leader of a great power, equal to the United States. In the cold waters of the Atlantic, that illusion was shattered. Washington has made its position clear. Russia's ghost fleet is no longer untouchable. Putin's reactions will not dictate U.S. policy. Whether this pressure ultimately forces Moscow back to negotiations remains uncertain. But one conclusion is unavoidable. Vladimir Putin looks weaker today than he has in years. And that may be exactly the point. What followed was not chaos. It was something far more dangerous for the Kremlin. Predictability. Within weeks of the Bela I seizure, patterns emerged. Every Russian-linked tanker that altered course near the Caribbean slowed. Every ship that disabled its transponder was tracked more aggressively. Every attempt to reflag vessels through friendly jurisdictions was met with paperwork delays, inspections, and quiet denials. This was not improvisation. It was doctrine. For years, Western sanctions had been porous, not because they were weak on paper, but because enforcement was cautious, fragmented, and often political. This time was different. The blockade around Venezuela was not an isolated move. It was a test case. And it worked. The United States and Britain demonstrated something Russia had long believed impossible, that maritime enforcement could be escalated without triggering a military response. The Kremlin had always assumed that the threat of confrontation, especially nuclear escalation, would freeze Western action. That assumption shaped Russian behavior from Crimea to Syria, from energy blackmail to cyber warfare. But the seizure of Russian-linked vessels shattered that logic. Washington did not blink. London did not retreat. And the world noticed. In the weeks that followed, satellite imagery showed a sharp decline in tanker traffic along routes commonly used by Russia's shadow fleet. Some ships anchored indefinitely off neutral coasts. Others vanished from tracking altogether, their operators unwilling to risk seizure but unable to operate openly. Each idle tanker represented millions of dollars in frozen revenue. Each delayed shipment tightened the screws on Russia's budget. The Kremlin attempted to respond in familiar ways. State television launched furious denunciations of Anglo-American piracy. Officials accused the West of violating international law. Foreign ministry spokespeople summoned diplomats and issued formal protests. None of it changed the facts on the water. Because this time, Russia was not facing a rhetorical campaign. It was facing logistics. And logistics are unforgiving. Oil that cannot be insured cannot be sold. Oil that cannot dock cannot be delivered. And oil that cannot move cannot fund a war. By mid-January, internal Russian economic reports, never intended for public release, painted a grim picture. Energy revenue projections were revised downward. Budget gaps widened. Emergency reserve allocations were discussed openly. The cost of the war in Ukraine, already staggering, was becoming harder to hide. And then came the second-order effects. Russian refineries began reducing output, citing maintenance. Regional governments quietly delayed infrastructure projects. Military procurement schedules slipped. Drone production targets were adjusted downward. These were not headline-grabbing developments. But wars are not lost in headlines. They are lost in spreadsheets. At the same time, thank you for watching. If you appreciate my work, leave a like and subscribe. Until next time, I wish you a nice day.